Good morning, everyone. It's my privilege and honor to welcome Ieasha Taitano, the Head of Innovation at Tracfone, for this very engaging and interesting fireside chat. Innovation for any organization is the central lever that drives growth for the organization. Today, the guest we have is Ieasha Taitano, the Head of Innovation at Tracfone. She is responsible for driving all the key innovations and the initiatives that are driving immense growth for Tracfone. Thank you so much, Ieasha. Thanks for taking time and welcome to the session. I would first like to begin asking you a very simple and basic question. Tell us about yourself. Tell us about the journey you have had so far, and tell us a little bit about what you do at Tracfone.
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, my name is Ieasha Taitano. I am the head of innovation at Tracfone. I run Tracfone Labs, which is a lean startup incubator focusing on new products that are adjacent to our core offering. So our labs primarily focus on fintech, healthcare, IoT, and digital experience. I specialize in starting new practices specifically, so I help people stand up human-centered concept testing and development. And I focus on kind of the specific types of problems that you face when you are fundamentally realigning behavior in a culture to adopt something new.
Wow, that's a great answer. So it's very insightful. And what I would now want to ask is, as a head of innovation at Tracfone, you drive a lot of things, and you are responsible for making sure that the growth charter of the organization is on track. And as a head of innovation, what are your thoughts on how can innovation drive the organization to the next level?
So in this case, you can release really, really great products, but if a user doesn't come to the product in the way that you imagine and in a way that you can predict, it's kind of for naught. So innovation is really this pairing between great ideas and just the right timing. And what market validation cycles let us do and concept development cycles do, they allow us to ensure that the idea and the timing for the consumer match.
Amazing, amazing. So Ieasha, this is a great insight for all the CIOs who are attending today. Innovation is not defined by some thesis or some article that you read. Innovation is defined when you put your customers in the center and then start building solutions that will really help them.
You got it. I often challenge executives. Executive leaders in general have a problem being able to articulate their customers' most relevant problems. And I don't mean with their particular products or solutions, I mean in life. So the challenge I give my executive teams when we are first starting innovation cycles is sitting down and having this very basic conversation that says, for your customers, who are your customers? What are the demographics they live in? And then could you rattle off the top 5 problems this person is dealing with right now in life? And if your answer is no, I don't think I can. Or, maybe the customer groups are too large, or we just don't know that customer group very well. You're going to have a hard time bringing them ideas, products, solutions that are going to fundamentally change their life, because you don't really know their life, right? And that's what a really good innovation product does. A really good innovation product ingrains itself into the daily routines of its users, right? That's the stuff that's really sticky, that when we talk about case studies, people get very excited about. You can't create that level of interaction or stickiness without some intimacy as to who your customer is and how they operate and what they're trying to do, even outside of your particular vertical. So here at Tracfone, the question isn't what are the 5 top problems related to cell phone service. It's know for your customers, what are their top 5 problems? And we at Tracfone have let the answers to those questions guide what adjacent verticals we are playing in, right? So for our customers, their problems around things like their finances, their health, their connectivity to the world, their access to the internet at large. These are really big broad reaching problems that they have. So what we're doing is approaching those problems and trying to create products and services that work for them inside of that problem set, versus just going to them with kind of our version of a cool new thing and waving it in front of them and saying, hey, do you like this? And in doing so, we're like hedging our bets. We are ensuring that the products and services we're bringing to them actually are relevant to their lives. And the additional benefit that we get is that our executive team, who has gone through this journey of finding out what their top problems are so that we can pick our adjacent areas, they've gotten to know our customers much better in this process. And that applies to everything they do, not just to innovation, right? They now have a more informed perspective of how their customers are making decisions, because they're aware of the most important decision-making factors in their customers' lives. And every time I have this process, or I do this with an executive team, they learn a lot, but they also, in retrospect, have a moment where they have say, duh, why didn't we do that sooner? And I think what happens is it just doesn't occur to folks as we're in the day-to-day of like our working lives and, you know, looking at P&L sheets and dealing with whatever it is we do, you know, professionally. It doesn't really occur to us sometimes to back up and check back in with who we serve and make sure we really understand what's going on with them as an order of business, as like a top line important creed to say that, hey, everyone in the decision-making cycle for said customer should understand these really fundamental things about said customer. And even just doing that, even outside of an innovation cycle, just focusing on knowing your customer itself will cause really innovative ideas to crop up. What we do is the formal practice of, you know, mining those areas and finding the insights and creating some rigor around conceptualizing how we would solve those problems. But even minus all of that infrastructure and tools and processes, the basic activity of, like I said, answering that question, what are your customers' top 5 most pending problems in life, will fundamentally change an executive team and the way they're working. And when we change executive teams, we change companies, right? Because we change the way the APEC decision maker works, and that cascades itself down. So that itself is a very, very good first step that is out, doesn't cost anything other than people's times for consideration. It can be done anywhere, obviously very light. I think it's a great challenge question for C-levels to bring to their C-level table, right? Like, it helps when you have a facilitator to do it, because everyone wants to say they know their customer this way. Everyone wants to say, oh, of course, yeah, let me rattle them off. But then ask yourself, once you build your list, how do you know that list is correct? How would you find out if it was true? And really involve yourself in the process of understanding and making sure whatever it is your table thinks is actually what's going on.
Excellent. That's a great answer, and that was very insightful. So Ieasha, if I have to ask you, what are the probably top 3 or 4 factors that influence the whole innovation journey in an organization? What would your answer be? What are the top 3 or top 4 that comes to your mind?
Yep. So one I've already said, right? So start customer first, find acute and frequent need. The second is human beings are really tricky. They're very, very hard to predict how they will behave. So don't predict, test instead. The idea of, or the heart of lean startup or many iterative innovation methodologies is the concept that don't invest in guesses, or hedge your bets as best as you can when you're guessing, because that's really the area that causes us to, you know, that's where we're wrong most often. So that's where we invest without realizing kind of what the results are. So test before you invest. That's my little rhyme there to share with the team. And the third one would be that to include innovation, to include your whole company in innovation, right? If you find yourself as senior leaders going to the same core group of trusted folks to brainstorm with, or to ideate with, or to solve problems with, or to innovate with, you're doing it wrong. Innovation requires a variety of perspective. Now, sometimes that is uncomfortable because we don't get what we want out of people when we do it that way. And so perhaps it'll take a little longer to do it that way, but the end product, the ideas that come out of sessions or of conversations that include a pretty constant rotating cast of characters are harder to get to, but are stronger concepts in general. Also, you know, I would say, just for me personally, and I know I'm an innovation person, so perhaps this is overweighted, but those are the conversations I really enjoy being part of. They feel good to be part of. And, you know, I've noticed this pattern in corporate America where, like I said, the folks on the top tend to think of themselves as like this apex ideator. It's like all the really good ideas are going to come from them, and they rally their teams around making those ideas happen. And they tend to trust this small group of people to do that again and again. And it may not seem like it, but that's stale. It's how everyone does it. It doesn't produce very usable results. So my tips or challenges would be to include lots of people in those ideations in your company, because it feels good to be part of the feel. It's a development opportunity to be a part of an ideation session, and to make sure that you're always talking to a fresh cast of characters. So, you know, if you find yourself having the same, you know, talking about 3 different ideas with the same person, shake it up a little bit. Invite other people into that dialogue. Grab some people that you normally wouldn't, or that you think are completely unrelated. So a lot of times when I'm doing these sessions, I'll say, hey, why don't we include someone from finance? And they'll say, oh, well, this isn't a finance idea, or this isn't an HR idea, or there's no technology in this idea. We don't want to include those people just so they can bring their expertise. We want to include those people because they have an alternative perspective. And in many cases, they have an outsider's perspective. So they're a pretty good proxy for a customer. So sometimes when you have a new idea, you might not think to include the ancillary folks in your organizations because, like I said, the ideas aren't specifically related to their area, but they're great general, like, hey, how does this idea sound? Or what might we add to this idea? Or how might we change it? They are often my first line of like socializing an idea. It'll be internally with people who aren't necessarily related to it, because their perspective is fresh and different. And so, you know, a good circle for brainstorming includes a lot of different voices, a lot of different people, and a lot of different perspective. And if you're not comfortable yet going out to your customers to do that, your employees are a perfect first group to practice with, and really challenge yourself to break out of whatever rut you're in with the same old people who you share your ideas with, to really enrich your perspective. And you can do that in or out of an innovation cycle. To me, that's just good general advice for ideating.
Excellent. That's great. So, Ieasha, now I would want to request and ask you a question about what is the secret sauce behind driving this whole innovation at Tracfone, right? And what is your secret sauce, and how are you doing it?
My boss, Jay, a really, really good sponsor, really is what it comes down to. In anthropology, for example, the word culture is not as nebulous as it is in corporate America. It's got really specific definitions and really specific mechanisms. And when you are getting to know a culture for the first time as an ethnographer, as an anthropologist, the first question you ask yourself is, how does this group make decisions? How do they execute decisions? Because decision makers set the tone for the rest of the group. So in this case, if you don't have executive sponsors, so if the people at the C level do not fundamentally understand the underpinning philosophies to why we are approaching innovation the way that we are, so that we're, for example, staying customer centric and that we want to test instead of guess. If that group is not on board with this, it is for naught. This is not a bottoms up change that can be made. This is unequivocally both So bottoms up people to do the work, including a lot of perspectives, top down executive sponsors that really understand the process. If your executive team is, for example, unwilling to do a 90-minute primer in whatever methodology you've decided to use to go do innovation, you're not ready to do this yet. Unlike some other methodologies where, hey, we can keep the mechanics behind the curtains, because innovation methodologies are so often changing the mechanics of how we make decisions, the apex decision makers need to be in that dialogue in a real way, in an invested way. And so at Tracfone, we spent 6 months getting our executive leadership team really on board. We did a lighthouse project. We explained concept. We prepared them to be the sponsors that our change was going to need ahead of time. So we didn't presume that that change was going to happen during the journey with everybody else. Because if they're not, if and by they, I believe I'm speaking to your target audience here, if you are not aware of how the mechanics need to work and your peers are not, and your leader is not, you won't be able to move forward in the space, because innovation by its very nature is a lot of risk and it's a lot of change. And if the decision makers aren't handling that risk well, or they aren't handling that change well, you will undo all of the good forward progress you build within your innovation teams with any innovation methodology you're using, right? There's so many out there to choose from. There's tons of great ones. They pretty much philosophically all say the same thing. You won't find a lot of disagreement in the methodology community. You know, just different ways, kind of like Agile, just different ways to move forward. But philosophically very similar. None of them work if your sponsorship team, your C-level suite, is not like 100% on board with what you're doing and how you're doing it. If they aren't on board with, for example, not being the ideators, letting the customer be the ideator, you can imagine how if I start harvesting customer insights to make really unexpected pivots with a product, because that's what it will feel like when you're doing innovation. It's going to feel like the team that's doing the innovation work, they're coming up with stuff that is unexpected. If it's not unexpected, then you aren't doing it right. The bad part of that is when we come back to executives with unexpected answers, if they're not willing to let the customer perspective answer the question, then they are going to reject those unexpected solutions. And you will get a whole lot of what you've already got. So to create the environment where we can really surprise and delight people, we have to kind of realize that at first we will be surprised, and it probably won't be delightful, because we as executives will think we know the answers before we've asked our customer. It's just by the proxy of being that apex decision maker, that's what happens. So we want to keep our executives as the head of the decision-making tree, but we want to remove them as the head of the ideation tree. And instead, we want to put the customer's perspective up there. And if they're not on board with that, then none of the innovation methodologies that I know of, and I know of quite a few, will work. You will be just spinning your wheels. And so in this case, it really, really does start from the top, from an executive level commitment to letting customers and design teams come up with the new ideas. If they're not willing to do that, no bueno, no go. Start at the beginning. So they have to be very, very committed to that credo before we start. And at Tracfone, they did a beautiful job of partnering and having those dialogues and going through that process. And because of that, we now have the fertile ground to, like, for example, interact with our vendors like SuneraTech, you know, who are really trusted partners for us. And now we have the headspace to include people outside of our building in the innovation process, because the executive team understands the cycle that we're using and they trust it. So it's okay to add other people outside of us to it. You know, we all know we work with vendors when we're looking for new technology, but like I like to call it the innovation Sherpas, the people we rely on to help us get from point A to point B. Sometimes those are vendors too. And if you haven't created the fertile ground with your executive team, they're going to be, it's going to be very hard to convince them to allow those Sherpas, whether it's someone who works for you or a vendor you're including like SuneraTech. You're going to have a hard time getting those people into the conversation in a constructive way. So building that headroom with that team is really the key I mean, it's the key to all really big change management. I guess it's recognizing that when we're doing innovation, we're doing really big change management. And so therefore you need that executive team to just fundamentally be on board. Then I think you'll find it's not easy. It's much easier to move forward, find cool stuff, add in our vendors and any other people from our ecosystem. A lot of times in innovation, we pull on think tanks, we pull on colleges, we pull on a lot of different places to kind of enrich our thinking. None of those outside voices can come to the table if the executive team is not kind of on point with what you're doing. So getting your peer groups, yourself, your boss into this headspace where you're looking for customer problems, you're problem finding instead of ideating. That's really the switch that needs to happen. Until you get there, you're not ready to move outside of your executive table. That you're really looking for them to show commitment to these concepts before you move forward.
Excellent. So that was a great session, Ieasha. So before we wind up, I know we have reached the time, but I would love to ask one last question. What would your thoughts and suggestions and feedback would be for all the audience who are attending this session as a key takeaway if they have to drive innovation in their organization?
Sure, then I'll give one piece of advice, but it's really important. CIOs don't have an excuse to not know their customers. It's easy when we're in technology or in any of the back office functions to say to ourselves, I don't own the relationship or I don't have access to the customers. But more and more, I think all CIOs agree that you're kind of transitioning into this other role, a little bit more like a COO, because you are enabling the operating model of a company. That's what all of your technology does when we add it all together, right? It becomes the operating model and usually the channel gate between you and a customer, right? It's because we own software development and we own all of the technology that interacts in our back end. So the days where that role can kind of live in the background, they're over now. They're over now because of the digital revolution. So if I had to leave one imparting advice outside of innovation, quite frankly, this is where I start when I start with companies. We don't even say the I word yet. That's not the first thing we tackle. The first thing we tackle is, do you know your customer? Can you rattle off your customer segments? Do you know the personas inside of those customer segments? And then can you name the top 4 or 5 needs inside of those segments? Doing that alone will completely change the way you show up at the table at work. It just will. And insisting that you and your team should, you have a right and you have a need to have access to the customer and what's going on with them is critical for creating solutions, particularly technology solutions that customers can interact with. I don't meet very many CIOs these days that don't agree with that, but if you're still in the camp that is like, I'm a back office and it's okay then for me to think of only my employees as my users and not the world at large as my users, I think it's time to reevaluate. And if you aren't being given that access, it's time to insist, because no company has the luxury of allowing their most critical channels, which tend to be digital, to be neglected or to not have the customer voice present at the very minimum, right? So at the very minimum, you need to get the customer voice inside of the technology that you are managing today, and whatever capability or capacity it touches them, including empowering the technology we do to empower employees to take care of our customers. That's included in a customer experience, right? So you have a place at the customer experience table. You have a very important place at the customer experience table. And if you aren't sitting there yet, if you aren't at that space and you don't know your customers, start. It is the number one thing that you can do to become more relevant in your company's conversation. And it's the number one thing you can do to ensure that you're creating products and services that get integrated into our customers' daily routines. And that's really the Shangri-La. Any one product that gets integrated into a customer routine on, let's say, a daily level will be extremely advantageous for your company in a way that I almost can't even predict, right? That's the magic of the iPhone, for example, is that it's in everybody's pocket all of the time. So the advantages to getting into a customer's life that way are like so multifold, it's hard to explain, right? But that's what we're in an innovation space. That's what we're all looking for, and it starts with sponsors who know their customers. And like I said, CIOs, CFOs, CTOs, all the folks who kind of service the back end, they sometimes say to themselves, well, you know, I don't necessarily have a right to go insist that I know the customer voice. And those times are over. You do, and you need to. In fact, it's your responsibility to. And so if maybe your first start isn't getting your whole table to be able to answer what are your customers' top 5 problems, maybe it's a research project for you, where you go and figure that stuff out and you do some empathetic listening and you be able to answer that question. That might be the first place you start. And like I said, I promise that doing that will completely change the way you approach your work, and it will completely change the way your work sees you.
Thank you so much, Ieasha. Thanks a lot for your time. This was one of the amazing sessions that I have hosted in recent past. Thank you so much for the partnership and all the insights. Have a wonderful day.